Americans were shocked at the true strength of North Korea's military. For decades, most believed the nation's arsenal was outdated, a relic of the Cold War and incapable of standing against the might of the United States. But what if everything you thought you knew was only part of the story? Behind the borders of the most secretive nation on Earth lies a force larger, more organized, and more unpredictable than many realize. Over 1 million active soldiers, thousands of hidden artillery positions dug into mountains, and ballistic missiles capable of reaching beyond Asia. The numbers alone raise questions that the world cannot ignore. Picture a tense morning over the Korean Peninsula. American satellites detect unusual movement, columns of armor rolling through tunnels, aircraft dispersing across secret runways, and radar systems flickering to life. Suddenly, the Pentagon faces a question that shakes even the most confident planners. If conflict erupted tomorrow, would America's technological superiority guarantee victory? Or would North Korea's sheer scale, secrecy, and discipline push the battlefield into chaos? Stay with this film, because what you're about to discover will change the way you look at one of the world's most underestimated powers. This is for education only. Let's begin. From the outside, North Korea seems frozen in time. Old propaganda films show soldiers marching in perfect formation, tanks that look like museum pieces, and jets that appear more suited to the 1960s than the 21st century. This is the picture many in the West carry: a force large in numbers but fragile in substance. Yet once you strip away the assumptions and look closely at the numbers, a different, far more unsettling reality emerges. North Korea maintains one of the largest standing armies in the world, with over 1.2 million active personnel and several million more in reserve. That means, on paper, its forces outnumber the entire U.S. active-duty military. For Washington, which often fights wars with coalition partners and smaller, agile forces, this is a startling prospect. It's not just about soldiers. It's about the psychology of facing a nation that can mobilize almost every able-bodied citizen into a fighting role. In such a system, the line between civilian and combatant blurs, making the battlefield unpredictable from the first hour of war. Consider the geography of the Korean Peninsula. To the north, mountains rise like walls, and hidden within them are reinforced bunkers, tunnel networks, and artillery positions aimed squarely at South Korea. Experts estimate that thousands of long-range guns, rockets, and missile systems are positioned just beyond the demilitarized zone. Within minutes of conflict, those weapons could unleash a barrage powerful enough to devastate Seoul, one of the world's largest cities, home to over 20 million people. The chilling truth is this: America's technological edge may win air superiority quickly, but no amount of stealth bombers can erase those artillery tubes fast enough to stop the opening salvos. The shock doesn't end there. In the realm of manpower, discipline, and ideology, North Korea fights differently. Soldiers are conditioned from birth with a doctrine of loyalty that borders on fanatic devotion. Military service is not simply a career. It's a way of life, an identity inseparable from survival. For American planners who rely heavily on advanced systems, drones, satellites, and professional volunteer forces, the question is not whether they can defeat North Korea, but at what cost. Victory on paper could still mean catastrophic losses in the real world, yet numbers alone only scratch the surface. America's true shock comes when they uncover how this force, though technologically inferior, has designed itself like a hedgehog covered in hidden spines and capable of inflicting immense damage on any attacker. The strategy is simple: deny America the quick, clean victory it always seeks, and instead drag the fight into a brutal war of attrition. This philosophy is what makes the North Korean threat unique, and why every Pentagon wargame involving the Korean Peninsula ends with scenarios that feel uncomfortably costly. And so, the suspense builds. Beyond the numbers, beyond the artillery, lies another layer of mystery. North Korea's obsession with secrecy and its sprawling tunnel systems that remain invisible to satellites. How many weapons are hidden underground? How many soldiers could bypass detection, appearing suddenly behind enemy lines? The world doesn't know. What America does know, however, is that the first shock is already clear. North Korea is not the frail relic many assume, but a fortress with manpower and artillery designed to shatter expectations. But if first shock is about size and firepower, the second shock lies in the skies above. Because while America believes it can dominate the air in any war, North Korea's approach to air defense tells a story no one expects. And that is where we'll go next. The night sky over the Korean Peninsula is thick, heavy with silence. Satellites glide above the Earth, their lenses pointed downward, capturing every movement, every flicker of radar. American analysts have long believed that the first step in any conflict would be simply clear the skies, blind the enemy, and dominate the battlefield from above. It is a strategy the United States has mastered in Iraq, in Serbia, in Libya. But what they discover when they study North Korea is not the familiar pattern of a weak air force waiting to be swept aside. Instead, they find a country that has turned the very act of survival into an art form. North Korea's air force is not modern. Its MiG-21s and MiG-29s are relics compared to America's F-22s and F-35s. Its bombers are slow, its training hours limited. Yet here lies the twist. The planes are not meant to win a duel against American stealth fighters. They are meant to delay, to confuse, to sacrifice themselves in ways that buy precious minutes for what really matters: air defenses hidden in the mountains, surface-to-air missiles buried deep underground, and radar arrays that switch on and off like phantoms. It is not an air force in the conventional sense. It is a shield, a decoy, a trap designed to punish any pilot bold enough to underestimate it. Imagine a scenario in which the United States launches its opening strike. Waves of stealth bombers cross the Pacific, slipping silently over the horizon. Their mission: disable radar, strike missile sites, and cripple command centers. The first wave succeeds. Explosions ripple through the night, and for a moment, it feels familiar, predictable. But then, the second wave encounters something unexpected. Radar systems that should have been destroyed suddenly come alive again. Surface-to-air missiles streak upward from hidden tunnels. American pilots report targets that simply vanish, as if swallowed by the mountains themselves. In those moments, confidence gives way to uncertainty. And the Pentagon faces the realization that this battlefield does not follow the usual script. The true shock comes not from the jets North Korea can field, but from the sky's invisible architecture of defense. The regime has spent decades building a layered system designed to deny the United States its greatest advantage: absolute air dominance. Even outdated missiles, when deployed in numbers and camouflaged with care, can create a deadly web. Combine that with radar deception, decoys, and underground bunkers, and suddenly the skies are not so safe. American commanders would be forced to adapt, stretching operations longer than planned, exposing aircraft to risk, and delaying the clean victory Washington always seeks. And then comes the human element, the pilots themselves. North Korean airmen train with an intensity born not of comfort but of survival. For them, the cockpit is not a career. It is a duty to a state that demands sacrifice. When a MiG pilot is ordered into the sky against an F-22, he knows he may not return. But his role is not to win in a traditional sense. His mission is to force the American pilot to turn, to reveal his stealth profile to radar to disrupt the perfect rhythm of the strike. Every second gained is another chance for the ground defenses to lock on. Another opportunity for artillery to keep firing south. Another heartbeat in which the regime survives. As the Pentagon watches these patterns unfold in simulations, a troubling question rises. How do you defeat an enemy that does not play by the rules you expect? In Iraq, the Air Force collapsed within days. In Serbia, radar sites were quickly neutralized. But in North Korea, the very landscape becomes a weapon. Mountains swallow missiles. Valleys echo with decoys. The sky itself becomes a maze of threats, some real, some imagined, but all capable of slowing the juggernaut of American power. And then, just as analysts think they understand, another twist emerges. Intelligence reports suggest that North Korea has experimented with integrating its air defense network into cyber systems. While the United States relies on digital coordination, satellite uplinks, and GPS precision, North Korea pursues a darker strategy: interference, jamming, deception. The possibility that American missiles could be redirected, that drones could lose contact, that GPS could fail in the most critical hour, rattles planners in ways far beyond the visible battlefield. Suddenly, the air war is not only about jets and missiles, it is about invisible signals, electronic ghosts that can bend reality in the heat of combat. This is the turning point. The United States, accustomed to controlling the skies with unquestioned superiority, must consider a scenario in which victory is delayed, in which every strike becomes costlier, in which every pilot must question whether the radar blip ahead is real or just another trap. And in that hesitation, North Korea gains the most precious resource of all: time. Time to fire more artillery into Seoul. Time to prepare counterstrikes. Time to turn a war America hopes to end quickly into a prolonged nightmare. For the American public, the realization is sobering. They had always imagined North Korea's Air Force as a museum of old machines easily swept aside. Yet in the labyrinth of defenses, in the discipline of its pilots, in the cunning use of decoys and deception, they see something else. They see a strategy that does not rely on victory in the sky, but on denying America the very thing it counts on most. The shock is not in the hardware, but in the doctrine, a doctrine built on the idea that survival itself can be weaponized. The climax of this chapter arrives in a single imagined moment. An American strike group pushes deep into North Korean airspace. The sky is dark, the mission clear. Suddenly, radar warnings light up across cockpits. Dozens of missiles rise from the ground, some real, some decoys, all dangerous. Pilots break formation, some dropping payloads early, others banking hard to avoid what they cannot fully see. In that chaos, the mission falters. Bombs land off target. Critical defenses survive. And as the strike group retreats, American commanders realize the terrible truth. This is not a war they can script with precision. This is a war where the enemy writes the rules. The question that lingers is haunting. If America cannot guarantee dominance in the skies, how does it secure victory on the ground? If stealth and speed are not enough, what weapon remains that can shatter the fortress North Korea has built in the mountains? That mystery, that unanswered question, is what draws us forward into the next chapter, where the battlefield expands beyond the air and into the invisible domain of cyberspace, where wars are not fought with bullets and bombs, but with silence, shadows, and signals that decide the fate of nations. The skies over North Korea fade into uneasy silence after the storm of missiles and radar flickers. For a brief moment, it seems as if the battlefield resets itself, both sides holding their breath, waiting for the next move. Yet the most unsettling threats are not carried by wings or rockets. They move invisibly, through cables, through code, through the unseen networks that bind the modern battlefield together. What shocks America most is not the roar of artillery or the thunder of jets, it is the realization that North Korea has learned to fight in a place where sound and firepower mean nothing. The United States prides itself on technological superiority. Its aircraft carriers operate like floating cities, powered by data and communication links that stretch across oceans. Satellites orbiting above provide constant eyes, ears, and guidance. Drones, precision missiles, and advanced command centers depend on signals that must be clear, steady, and unquestioned. But in North Korea, planners see something different, a nation that has embraced asymmetry not just in the trenches or tunnels, but in cyberspace. Here, the imbalance of power becomes a weapon. With fewer resources, fewer machines, and less visibility, North Korea has built units that specialize in disruption rather than domination. Reports trickling out of past cyber ICBMs tell fragments of a larger story. Attacks that disabled South Korean banks, malware that struck global corporations in waves of chaos, and perhaps most alarming of all, operations that hinted at the ability to reach across borders and infiltrate networks far beyond Asia. For the Pentagon, the lesson is stark. If North Korea could unleash such disruptions in peacetime, what might they attempt when their survival is on the line? Imagine the opening hours of a conflict where not only missiles are launched, but systems go dark. GPS coordinates falter. Drones lose their connections. Critical communication between ships in the Pacific begins to scramble. It does not take a massive technological leap to cause havoc. All it requires is precision disruption at the right moment. For American forces that rely on clarity and synchronization, this creates a battlefield where confidence turns to hesitation and hesitation turns to vulnerability. The turning point comes when American analysts realize the scale of North Korea's cyber units. Thousands of personnel, trained quietly in hidden schools, some operating not from within North Korea itself, but from safe houses scattered across other countries. They are not bound to a battlefield. They can reach into an adversary's systems from anywhere. In this sense, geography, which has always favored North Korea with its mountains and tunnels, now extends into the digital world. No aircraft can bomb a keyboard. No satellite can see a line of code in motion. The battlefield has expanded into an invisible dimension, and America, for all its technology, suddenly finds itself hunted there. And yet, the most dramatic twist is not simply in disruption. It is in deception. Cyber warfare is not only about shutting systems down. It is about planting illusions. False radar signals appear where none exist. Missile warnings flash, sending commanders scrambling, only to vanish seconds later. Communication lines whisper instructions that seem authentic, but lead forces astray. The very fabric of trust between man and machine becomes fragile, and when trust breaks, even the strongest army hesitates. For the United States, the emotional shock is profound. Soldiers, sailors, and pilots who have always believed in the reliability of their systems now face the gnawing doubt that every piece of information could be compromised. In that hesitation lies danger, because while America questions what is real, North Korea buys time to unleash its next move. This climax builds when simulations envision a moment where an ASNA, American Carrier Strike Group, approaching the Peninsula, suddenly loses part of its network. Missiles are detected, but the coordinates flicker. Drones go silent. Orders arrive, but no one is certain if they are genuine. In the seconds lost to confusion, the perfect shield of American coordination begins to fracture. It is not that North Korea can sink a carrier with a single strike. It is that they can make the carrier hesitate long enough for other dangers to close in. But the suspense sharpens even further when the battlefield shifts once more, this time above the Earth, into the black silence of space. Because as America leans heavily on satellites for vision, guidance, and communication, North Korea has begun to reach for weapons that can target those very eyes in the sky. The regime's missile tests, often dismissed as political theater, hide a darker possibility: the ability to launch anti-satellite weapons, crude but capable of creating chaos. Even a single successful strike could scatter debris that blinds not only the United States but the entire global network that keeps modern life running. It is here that the audience feels the rising stakes most sharply. The battle is no longer confined to Korea or even Asia. A war in this space would ripple across oceans, across continents, disrupting trade, navigation, communication worldwide. Suddenly, the what-if becomes larger than a regional conflict. It becomes a scenario where the shock spreads from the Pentagon to every corner of the globe. And then comes the twist that no one expects. American intelligence discovers evidence of North Korea experimenting with unconventional space tactics, not the sleek satellites of superpowers, but crude, disguised technology that could be deployed with almost no warning. Something as simple as a disguised satellite drifting quietly until the day it disrupts communication or collides with something critical would rewrite the rules. Unlike conventional armies, these hidden tools cannot be paraded in military marches. They remain shadows, waiting. The emotional pulse rises here. The audience feels the weight of a battlefield where missiles, jets, and soldiers are no longer the only players. Instead, code, signals, and satellites join the war, weaving a net of uncertainty around every decision. The suspense that began with artillery aimed at Seoul now stretches into the stars themselves. But even as analysts wrestle with these revelations, another question emerges, sharper than before. If North Korea can hold America at bay in the skies, and if it can disrupt its systems in cyberspace and space itself, then what happens when these strategies combine? What happens when artillery, missiles, cyber disruption, and satellite threats strike in a coordinated wave designed to overwhelm even the most advanced military machine in the world? The chapter closes on that chilling question, unresolved, echoing in the silence left behind. For the first time, the audience sees that the shock is not just in what North Korea possesses, but in how it uses its strength, not to win in the conventional sense, but to make victory itself uncertain. And as the lights dim on this part of the story, the next stage waits in the shadows, the naval confrontation, where the vast Pacific Ocean becomes the stage for yet another twist in America's greatest strategic nightmare. The ocean becomes the next battlefield. After the skies and cyberspace grow clouded with uncertainty, the gaze of both nations shifts outward, toward the endless blue that separates the Korean Peninsula from the American homeland. For the United States, the sea has always been a symbol of dominance. Carrier strike groups glide across the Pacific like steel fortresses, each one a self-contained empire of firepower, aircraft, and command. To most nations, the arrival of a single carrier spells overwhelming might. But here again, North Korea's strength reveals itself not in symmetry, but in defiance. The regime understands it cannot match America ship for ship. It cannot launch carriers, cruisers, or destroyers that rival U.S. fleets. Instead, it has spent decades designing an ocean strategy built around shadow submarines that slip quietly through coastal waters, missile boats that dart like wasps, and artillery batteries hidden in coastal cliffs, waiting for the right moment to strike. The sea, vast and open, is also treacherous. For America, accustomed to clear seas and visible enemies, the Korean coastline becomes a labyrinth, every wave hiding a possible threat. The turning point begins when intelligence paints a picture that unsettles the Navy. North Korea, maintains one of the largest submarine fleets in the world, though most are small, outdated, and primitive by modern standards. Yet here lies the paradox. Their very primitiveness makes them dangerous. Diesel-electric subs, small and quiet, hug the seafloor, slipping into shallows where advanced American sonar struggles to track them. For carrier commanders, the threat is not in their power, but in their unpredictability. A single torpedo, fired from the shadows, could cripple a billion-dollar vessel and tilt the balance of the Pacific overnight. To make matters worse, these submarines are not scattered randomly. They are woven into a coastal defense net, supported by fast attack craft, hidden minefields, and land-based anti-ship missiles positioned along the rugged shoreline. The ocean near Korea is not the open expanse where America prefers to fight. It is narrow, shallow, and treacherous, a hunting ground designed to bleed even the strongest navy. The suspense builds when naval simulations reveal a nightmare scenario. A U.S. strike group approaches, confident in its layered defenses. But as it closes within range, radar picks up a swarm of small vessels, fast and erratic, each armed with missiles powerful enough to damage larger ships. Behind them, submarines stir in the depths, waiting to ambush. Overhead, coastal artillery positions awaken, camouflaged for years, now launching volleys that force American ships to shift and scatter. Suddenly, the ocean that seemed like an open road becomes a killing field of crossfire. The climax of this sequence comes with a realization that chills commanders. The American Navy, though vastly more powerful, is fighting in a trap where every advantage is contested. Aircraft carriers, usually the pride of the fleet, are forced to stand farther back, their aircraft limited by distance. Destroyers, designed for missile defense, are overwhelmed by sheer numbers of incoming threats. Even victory in such an environment feels costly, the kind of victory that bleeds resources and time, the very things North Korea seeks to exploit. And then comes the twist. For years, Western analysts have speculated about North Korea's development of ballistic missiles with anti-ship capability. The thought of a land-based missile striking a moving carrier in the open ocean has always seemed unlikely, even fantastical. But intelligence reports suggest otherwise. Tests, shrouded in secrecy, hint at weapons designed to target ships far beyond the coastline. The possibility that North Korea could reach into the sea with precision strikes forces the United States to reconsider every maneuver. No longer can the Navy assume safety beyond the horizon. Even in the wide Pacific, the shadow of Korea's missile force stretches outward, creating doubt where once there was dominance. The emotional stakes rise here. For the American public, accustomed to seeing carriers as untouchable, the idea of them being vulnerable shakes the very foundation of confidence. These ships are symbols of power, instruments of projection across the globe. To imagine one disabled, smoking on the horizon, is to imagine America's pride wounded in full view of the world. And that is precisely the psychological weapon North Korea wields. It does not need to sink an entire fleet. It only needs to create fear of loss, hesitation, and movement, and the possibility that every wave hides danger. As the story builds, a memory lingers from earlier chapters. The skies, once thought secure, were disrupted by hidden defenses. The cyber realm, once considered America's private domain, was pierced by deception. Now the sea, long dominated by American carriers, reveals its own treacherous undercurrents. Each domain echoes the same theme. North Korea does not fight to match. It fights to deny, to delay, to erode confidence until even the strongest force hesitates. The climax of the naval confrontation comes in a single imagined moment. An American destroyer, escorting the fleet near the peninsula, suddenly detects incoming missiles. Defensive systems roar to life, intercepting some but not all. One missile slips through, striking the vessel with a force that rattles the fleet. Smoke rises from its deck. Sailors rush to contain the damage, and for the first time, America realizes that even its most advanced ships are not immune. In that instant, victory feels fragile. The question is no longer whether America can win, but whether it can win without unacceptable loss. The suspense deepens with a new, sharper question. If the Navy, with all its power, can be pushed back, what about the ground forces waiting for a landing? If the seas are contested, how can America deliver reinforcements, supplies, and heavy equipment to the peninsula? What happens if the very bridges to battle are threatened before the fight even begins? The chapter closes with that question echoing like a drumbeat. The ocean, once the path of American strength, has become uncertain. The carriers hold their distance. Submarines linger unseen. Missile trails fade into the mist of the horizon. And beyond it all, the Korean coastline waits, bristling with defenses, daring the world's strongest navy to step closer. The unresolved tension is clear. If America cannot guarantee safe passage across the sea, how can it guarantee victory on land? And that question leads us into the next chapter, where the ground itself fortified, tunneled, and prepared for decades becomes the most formidable battlefield of all. The coastline fades behind a curtain of mist and fire. The carriers withdraw to safer waters, their aircraft patrolling nervously above the horizon, while the destroyers and submarines hold formation in tense silence. Yet the war, if it comes, cannot be won from the sea alone. Every strategy, every plan, points inevitably toward the ground. And it is here, on the rugged land of the Korean Peninsula, that the true shock awaits. The American military, with its precision strikes and technological might, has always relied on the principle of rapid dominance. Land, when reached, is meant to be seized quickly, stabilized, and secured. But North Korea has spent generations preparing for the opposite. The ground is not simply territory. It is a fortress, a maze, a weapon in itself. Every hill conceals a bunker. Every mountain hides tunnels. Every village could transform in an instant into a battlefield. For decades, while the outside world assumed decay, the regime was quietly digging deeper, carving miles of underground networks designed to outlast bombs and outmaneuver invaders. American intelligence knows some of these tunnels exist. Reconnaissance flights, defectors' testimonies, and seismic sensors have revealed glimpses of vast chambers and passageways beneath the earth. But no one truly knows the full scale. Some estimate hundreds of miles of tunnels, large enough to move tanks and artillery in secrecy. Others believe entire brigades could vanish underground, re-emerging behind enemy lines without warning. In such an environment, the traditional idea of front lines begins to dissolve. Victory in one sector may mean nothing. If the enemy can appear unexpectedly in another, the turning point comes as wargaming scenarios unfold in the Pentagon. A U.S. mechanized division pushes north, advancing with speed and firepower. Resistance appears minimal at first. Then, suddenly, artillery fire erupts from ridges thought to be clear. Reinforcements arrive not from visible roads, but from hidden exits cut into cliffsides. Entire companies emerge from underground like ghosts, striking supply lines, disrupting convoys, and vanishing once more. The battlefield transforms into a labyrinth where movement itself becomes dangerous, and progress is measured not in miles gained but in hours survived. For the American soldier, the emotional toll is immense. Every step forward carries the weight of uncertainty. Is the village ahead truly abandoned, or is it wired with traps? Is the ridgeline clear, or does a concealed battery wait in silence? The land, scarred with decades of fortification, becomes alive with suspicion. This is not the open desert of the Middle East, where enemies could be seen at distance. This is a place where the Earth itself seems to conspire against intruders. The climax arrives in a chilling simulation. U.S. forces push toward Pyongyang, their momentum steady, their confidence cautiously building. Then, without warning, dozens of artillery positions erupt simultaneously from camouflaged bunkers. Missiles streak upward, not toward distant cities, but into the advancing columns themselves. Communications scramble as cyber interference returns, leaving units uncertain whether reinforcements are coming or cut off. In the chaos, North Korean troops surge from tunnels, attacking with ferocity that defies exhaustion. For hours, the battlefield sways violently, each side taking and losing ground. By the time the smoke clears, the Americans have advanced only a few miles at a cost so heavy it calls the entire mission into question. And then comes the twist, the revelation that deepens the shock further. Intelligence reports confirm what had long been rumored. Certain tunnels extend beneath the demilitarized zone into the south. This means the war might not be confined to the north at all. In the midst of an American advance, entire units could surface behind Allied lines, striking bases, airfields, and civilian centers with devastating surprise. Suddenly, the assumption that the battlefield would remain contained collapses. The war's reach could spread instantly, destabilizing not only the front but the rear, overwhelming defenses designed for a different kind of conflict. The stakes are now undeniable. The United States, for all its strength, faces a war where every advantage is contested, every move countered by a design decades in the making. The skies are shadowed by decoys and defenses. The seas are laced with submarines and missiles. The ground itself is a fortress, riddled with tunnels and bunkers that bend the very concept of battle. And through it all, the greatest weapon North Korea wields is not technology, but time, the ability to delay, to deny, to make every hour costly until victory feels indistinguishable from defeat. But even as the ground war reveals its horrors, another, darker question looms in the minds of planners and civilians alike. What happens if the regime, pressed to its limits, decides to unleash the one weapon it has held in reserve all along? What happens if the battlefield expands not only into cyber or space, not only into tunnels and seas, but into the unthinkable realm of nuclear fire? The chapter ends with that question suspended in silence, unresolved, heavy with dread. The audience is left staring into the abyss of possibility, where the final shock, the greatest of all, waits in the shadows, daring us to step closer. The silence after the ground battle is deceptive. Smoke rises from ridges, artillery positions burn, and yet deeper questions hang heavier than the dust in the air. The Americans have seen the tunnels, felt the weight of attrition, and faced the shock of an enemy that refuses to collapse. But beneath every calculation, beneath every grim assessment, lies the shadow no one dares to name aloud too quickly. If the war drags on, if the regime feels its very survival slipping away, what line would it refuse to cross? That unspoken fear is the nuclear question, the final and most devastating. Unknown. The world has long debated the scale of North Korea's nuclear arsenal. Some say it numbers only a handful of warheads, crude in design and limited in reach. Others believe the stockpile could already climb into the dozens, with missiles that stretch across oceans. What matters most is not the number, but the intent. The regime has broadcast its willingness to use them, parading missiles through Pyongyang streets in carefully choreographed displays, sending a clear signal: these weapons are not bargaining chips, they are lifelines. And for American planners, that reality shatters any illusion of control. The turning point comes when simulations shift from conventional battles to scenarios involving nuclear escalation. A U.S. advance edges closer to Pyongyang. Airstrikes pound fortified positions. But then, intelligence intercepts a chilling signal: preparations at an underground facility believed to house nuclear assets. Satellite images confirm unusual activity. The question lands with a weight that silences every room in the Pentagon: what if the regime, cornered, decides that losing conventionally means nothing if it can wound its enemy with the ultimate weapon? For the American public, the shock is visceral. For decades, nuclear war has existed in the realm of Cold War history books or abstract threats from distant states. To imagine its possibility on the Korean Peninsula is to imagine disaster not just for soldiers, but for millions of civilians across Asia and perhaps beyond. Seoul, Tokyo, Guam all lie within potential range. And if even one missile were to arc across the Pacific, the consequences could ripple to American soil itself. The climax of this chapter builds in a single imagined moment. Sirens wail across bases in South Korea as early warning systems detect the launch of a missile. The trajectory is uncertain, the payload unknown. Seconds stretch into eternities as American defense systems lock on. Interceptors rise into the night sky, chasing the threat in a desperate race. The impact of whether they succeed or fail is almost secondary to the fear it generates. The world now knows. The nuclear threshold is not theoretical. It is real, it is immediate, and it is terrifying. Yet even here, another twist emerges. Analysts uncover evidence that North Korea has experimented with tactical nuclear weapons, smaller devices designed not for distant cities but for the battlefield itself. A single strike on advancing American forces could halt momentum entirely, shattering units, demoralizing survivors, and forcing Washington into an agonizing decision. Does it escalate in return? Does it pull back, conceding ground to avoid catastrophe? The very presence of such weapons turns every advance into a gamble. The emotional weight deepens. As the audience realizes that America's greatest strength, its overwhelming military power, becomes less decisive, when nuclear uncertainty lingers in the background, every decision now carries existential risk. Every move forward could trigger a retaliation that no technology, no missile defense, no strategy can guarantee to stop. And in that uncertainty, North Korea achieves its ultimate objective: not to win outright, but to make victory itself too costly to pursue. The turning point sharpens when global pressure rises. Allies demand caution. Rivals exploit the chaos. The United Nations erupts in emergency sessions, while civilians across Asia flood shelters, fearing the worst. The war that began with artillery and tunnels now threatens to pull the entire world into its orbit. And at the center of it all, the Pentagon faces the chilling possibility that every scenario, no matter how carefully planned, ends in catastrophe. But the true shock, the final twist, lies in the realization that North Korea may not even need to launch a nuclear strike to achieve its goal. The mere threat, the constant possibility, forces the United States to restrain itself, to hesitate, to second-guess every action. A weapon that is never fired still changes the course of battle. It bends strategy, it paralyzes momentum, and it leaves even the strongest nation on earth questioning its own limits. The chapter closes with a haunting image. Deep beneath a mountain, in a chamber shielded from satellites and bombs, a warhead waits in silence. Its presence alone casts a shadow that stretches across oceans, touching Washington, Tokyo, Seoul, and beyond. And as the world holds its breath, one question remains suspended in that silence, unresolved. In the face of such a weapon, how far would America truly go? That question lingers like a warning, leaving the audience in the grip of the final, most devastating uncertainty. The war may never be fought. The weapons may never be used. Yet the shock remains, not in the explosions, but in the realization that the very possibility reshapes everything. And with that, the story does not end, it only leaves us staring into the abyss of what might come next. The warhead waits in the dark, silent yet alive with meaning. It does not need to be launched to command the battlefield. Its existence alone shapes every decision, every order, every hesitation in Washington. Yet as America grapples with the terror of nuclear escalation, another shock begins to surface, one even harder to calculate, one that lies not in the weapons themselves, but in the human dimension behind them. Because if nuclear fire is the ultimate deterrent, the question that gnaws at commanders and policymakers alike is this: who truly controls the trigger? And what happens when fear, loyalty, and desperation collide in the minds of those who wield that power? For decades, North Korea has cultivated a system built around absolute control. Orders flow from the top, unquestioned, unchallenged, binding millions of soldiers in iron discipline. But in the fog of a nuclear confrontation, control can slip in ways no one predicts. American analysts begin to explore scenarios that haunt even the most hardened war planners. What if a commander, convinced that the regime is about to collapse, decides to act without authorization? What if a single miscalculation, a radar error, or a cyber deception convinces Pyongyang that an American nuclear strike is already inbound? In such moments, the greatest shock is not the power of the weapons themselves, but the fragility of the human decisions that guard them. The turning point comes during a war game where a simulated American strike penetrates deep into the peninsula. The regime's command structure falters. Communications are cut. In the confusion, one missile unit believes it has lost contact with central authority. The officers, trained to act in defense of the state at all costs, interpret silence as collapse. Their solution is catastrophic, they prepare to launch. In the simulation, the strike is aborted by higher command in time, but the lesson is chilling. The margin for error is razor thin. For the American public, the emotional weight deepens. Until now, the shocks of North Korea's military strength were measured in numbers: soldiers, submarines, artillery tubes, missiles. Now the shock is measured in something far less predictable: human judgment under unimaginable pressure. A single choice, a single misstep, could ignite the abyss. And yet, another twist emerges. Intelligence suggests that North Korea's nuclear command may not be centralized in the way many assume. Some experts believe the regime has deliberately dispersed both weapons and authority, ensuring that no single strike can decapitate the arsenal. This means America cannot rely on a single precision attack to remove the threat. Even if Pyongyang itself were neutralized, the weapons could remain scattered in hidden bunkers, guarded by commanders whose orders may be unclear in the chaos of war. The realization is sobering. The nuclear threat is not a single shadow to be erased, but a constellation of risks that stretch across the landscape, each one capable of unleashing devastation. The climax of this chapter rises in a scenario painted for Pentagon strategists. American forces, after weeks of grinding battle, begin to encircle Pyongyang. The regime is fractured, its conventional forces bleeding, its tunnels and bunkers collapsing under relentless bombardment. Victory feels within reach. And then, without warning, state television, still broadcasting from an undisclosed location, issues a chilling declaration. The regime claims it has armed tactical nuclear warheads and will deploy them on the battlefield if American forces advance further. The world watches in breathless silence as Washington debates its next move. Does it call the bluff, risking annihilation of entire divisions? Or does it pause, giving the regime the one thing it has always sought: time? The twist is not whether the weapons are actually used. It is the paralyzing uncertainty that grips the most powerful military in the world. The United States, which has always prided itself on decisive action, now finds itself in a stalemate born not of equal power, but of asymmetric terror. And in that paralysis lies the final shock. North Korea, long dismissed as backward and fragile, has engineered a strategy that turns its weakness into strength, its isolation into leverage, its survival into a weapon against even the mightiest opponent. But the story does not end here. Beyond the nuclear threshold lies an even sharper question, one that few dare to ask aloud. If the conflict ever escalated to that level, what would be the aftermath? What would remain not only of the Korean Peninsula, but of global stability itself? Would rivals like China or Russia intervene, emboldened by America's hesitation? Would allies lose faith in the guarantees that have shaped the balance of power for decades? The shock of North Korea's strength is not confined to its arsenal. It reverberates through the architecture of the entire world order. The chapter closes with a final unresolved moment, heavy with suspense. The camera lingers on the image of that hidden warhead, buried deep beneath a mountain, guarded by silence and secrecy. It is not the launch button itself that terrifies. It is the uncertainty of what men will do when faced with impossible choices, and what the world will look like when those choices are made. The audience is left in the grip of one last haunting question. In the end, is America's greatest challenge the weapons of North Korea, or the shadows of fear and hesitation those weapons create?